I'd like to know how you are. You've been on holiday.
It's a temperature check.
Hang on a minute. You've been on holiday how long ago?
Got back 10 days ago.
Yeah, so surely the tan's not lasting that.
This has faded a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
What colour do you go?
Like an Indian.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
What's in your blood?
Like if we haven't had this conversation before, then I feel like we have, but absolutely zero of anything exotic.
Really?
Yeah, like nothing whatsoever. So Joe,
so why do I look like me and you look like you?
You're
then?
ginger. There's part of the challenge for yourself.
Well, strawberry blonde. Thanks very much.
But so people always say, "Oh, are you Greek? Are you Italian?" Like I did that, that DNA test thing, and it came back like 79% north of England, 22% northeast of England, 5% Scotland.
I mean, even the curly hair.
I know.
You don't. So I've never asked. This is a very personal question. You don't get that done. That's what your hair looks like.
I've never had a perm.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I imagine you've been asked that in your life. Yeah.
I've always had curly hair. I used to go pot noodle in school.
Yeah. I got called worse related to my hair as well. But so
kids can be so cruel.
So this is a faded tan. That's impressive.
It's a faded tan. Yeah.
Right,
I'll be back up again at the weekend. I'll be on the allotment of the weekend. So
yeah, in October.
It's nice and sunny tomorrow and Sunday.
Nice. Yeah, that's my favorite. This is such a boring thing to say. My favorite weather, since you asked, is when it's cold and sunny.
Yeah,
that's what I like. It seems like good allotment weather as well.
Yeah, it is. You can get some
this
work
is boring.
done.
We've got to move on. People have
join us again on allotments weekly.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another book to discuss.
Okay,
as is my way. From worst to first. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Have we mentioned this on a previous podcast?
You've mentioned the guy from Continental.
Yes. So this is the book. Gordon Bethune. He's very much a transformational CEO. So as in the name, clue is in the name, when he started with Continental, they were ranked worst on everything. Delays and value for money and pretty much every metric they were ranked worst. He came in and he, sorry to spoil the book, transformed to being first on many things.
I need to read it now.
There you go. It's a really interesting book. I always love reading something. If you can see here, it's an older book. When was this book? This book was...
Well, it looks like he is from the 80s.
I would say 80s, maybe late 80s, maybe it was... Oh, more modern. This is a very modern book.
He never had anyone to look after his style then.
No, he didn't. So that picture looks very, or maybe we're just getting old.
We're old.
So one of these, very much the correct way to think of Gordon Bethune is a transformational CEO, and it's a. I always love the airline stories. They're good. I've got another airline to talk about later. It's always a really interesting organization. And I think it's one of these things, Netflix I think of as being the same. The output is constant. Like everything has to be done to a very high level constantly. You have however many flights they have every day, like Netflix is a different example, of course, but they have to be so prolific with just constantly churning out great these very fast paced businesses, they have to be turning over things. I always think they're a really interesting business model. And, especially in America, it seems like the airlines are just good studies on what works, what doesn't work. Because fundamentally, they're all doing the same thing. They're getting in the air and taking people from A to B. And some of them are wildly successful and have been for generations, and some are successful for a bit or fail. And so it's always an interesting area and industry to look at as to why. Now, some of the things that I like about this book and what Gordon did is how, when he came in, he made things very, very simple. That's what he did. He identified two things that he wanted to transform within Continental Airlines, and he wanted to make them predictable and reliable as an airline. They're the two things. So going back to the many conversations we've had, you can think about that of the incoming philosophy. They're the principles that he wants Continental to be striving towards, to be predictable and to be reliable. Gordon and what he did at Continental is one of the great studies, and I haven't done the work to do my due diligence of tracing back where this phraseology came from, but he was a big advocate for what you measure and what you reward is what you get. This is probably where I learnt this from most strongly. He knew that in his bones and structured around the philosophy, and then putting the customs in place or the traditions and systems in place to reward the behavior he actually wants. He was a really big proponent for that. So here's a few examples of what they did. Here are the examples of the mechanisms that he put in place to make that predictability and reliability actually happen. So bearing in mind, this was a long time ago now. He put in place a $65 bonus each month if Continental Airlines were in the top half of airlines arriving on time. How simple is that? Majorly, not a nominal fee at that time, still a significant fee for across all of their employee base, but nothing crazy. And that, in combination with a number of other things that he did, transformed the way that the organization operated, because this mechanism of how you pay people, what you measure them on, and then how you reward them is probably the biggest driver of behavior. That's the one thing that I'm always interested when I go in and look in an organization. I like to see the things that are in place around how you pay people and what you're driving to, because it's the most impactful. It's the most impactful one. And this very simple 65, just get us in the top half of our reliability. It completely transformed, and let me make sure it was within 9 months, they were consistently ranking in the top 5 within 9 months from being bottom on all of these lists.
For context, you know how many's in the list?
No.
Okay.
I would say
if it's 10 and it's only just in the top half, I mean.
I don't know. Okay. I'd be guessing. I don't know. It's America a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of them. It's within so. What do they call it when it's a domestic airlines? So it's loads of them. I don't know how many. Yeah. I'd be guessing. Be good if I knew that. But you went 50. So what they did is they upped the target when they were getting into the top 5. They upped the target to be in the top 3, and because it was working so well, upped the bonus to $100. They started ranking 1 or 2 consistently for then months and months and years and years. Now, that is we've spoken about this before about CEOs and how what you want to look for as a general rule within an organization is having a really strong succession plan for its incoming CEO. And in that vein, you want to do your best to try and nurture someone internally. However, the exception to that rule is when the business is failing and you want something fresh coming in, which is what Gordon was. It's the same as Louis Gerstner Jr., who came up with the Culture is the Game, the name of this podcast. Same situation there. What Gordon came in and did, obviously, it would be oversimplifying all of the things he did. He did many things. This is what he cites as being the transformation within the organization. So simple. What you measure and what you reward is what you get. He knew what he wanted at the philosophy level. He wanted to be predictable and reliable. And then he designed a system to make that happen. It's a really good instance of this principle that I call philosophy first. How easy would it be for another incoming CEO to come into the organization, probably with an airlines background or something similar, and instead of asking that first question of what do I want, what matters most here, and therefore answering something approximating I want to be reliable and I want to be predictable, and they start at the design level of just trying things, just trying to implement things that they've done before, your decision making is inferior compared to what your decisions are if you act philosophy first and you think philosophy first. It's a lovely example of that.
So predictable and reliable. When you said that, I was thinking, that's what a customer wants.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of a focus of what did you call them, your philosophies, needs to be customer focused rather than business for the business?
I think they're one and the same thing.
Okay.
So there are, of course, aspects of a philosophy. So if you think of it as your values that are more geared towards customers, particularly when you're explicit. So you're talking about excellent customer service, or however the business phrases it. And there are some other things that are more geared towards internally your employees and how you look after them. But when you package the whole thing together, there should be a good balance of the two. There are many principles that transcend both internally and externally. You want to create a little microcosm of the world in which you're trying to create. So I keep referencing this because it's one of my I was going to say my favorite clients. That's not a good thing to say, is it? But one of my favorite values of one of the clients I work for is critical thinking. And it's something that they're trying to create in the world by the products that they create. And it's a good example of something that if you're going to start espousing that to the world and trying instilling that into the world, you better do it internally very well. You better have your organization and your ecosystem be like a critical thinking machine. You make great decisions and you engage in great ideological conflict internally. So this is what I think of. This phrase is something I learned from Satya Nadella, who at Microsoft, and he was talking about creating this microcosm of the world you're trying to create. So I think there are lots of principles like that if you take one in isolation, might be more geared towards your customer than internally. But as a whole, as your guiding principles, you want a balance of the two things of like, how do we treat people internally? I suppose predictable and reliable, probably there's a weight towards the customer experience, but there's let's take this as an example. If you're espousing as an organization, you want to be predictable and reliable for your customers. Let's say at the end of the month, when employees are getting paid, better pay on time and it better be the right amount. You don't want that incongruence. So you think, hang on, we're all aiming towards we're doing everything we can and driving towards making sure the experience for our customers is predictable and reliable, and you can't do that for us as an employee. So there's always ways you have to look at these things, even if they're geared towards the customers. But how do we make sure we're congruent with that internally as well?
It's really interesting because my thoughts around the fact that it was a cash bonus made my stomach skip a little bit because of the challenges that you have with associating someone's skill and ability with cash. And this is from years of working in sales I'm talking about here. And the challenge of someone thinking they get a bonus based on something and they've already spent it, or may have already borrowed it and spent it actually, really, not just spent it in the head, and then it not happening. So my first thought when you mentioned about the bonus, I wrote down, like, do we feel comfortable about cash bonuses as a driver for behavior? Because is that going to cause a problem in the future? But if reliable is something that
I think it has its place. I think you have to be careful about it, and as with anything like this, you have to be very diligent in the design. This is another part of this book that I wanted to talk about, relatedly, that Gordon was a big proponent of. This is when you have these bonus systems in place, you must do everything you can to enable people to be able to achieve that. So and this happens a lot. It's a weird thing that I'm sure this is something you'll feel as though you recognize in organizations you've seen, of they have these sort of almost like stretch goal bonuses in place, and they can be very difficult and unrealistic to achieve. They can be sort of like, it's like a stretch goal kind of thing. That's demoralizing for 99% of the population. There might be some people who like that out in the world that just want to be tested, but most people don't like that. Most people like to know, especially when you're dealing with, people working in cabin crew, they're not millionaires. The money is helpful to them. It's again particularly weighted to how much this was back in the day. It makes a difference. It makes a difference to their life and paying the mortgage. So one thing that Gordon was really conscious of is making sure that when you set up a reward system for employees, you've got to do everything you can to make it as possible for them to achieve it in your systems and your processes and the way that you train them, everything you do. So I definitely think that there are many examples, and will continue to be many examples in the world of where reward systems based around money have been very, very poorly executed. And I think many examples where they shouldn't be in place. You shouldn't be rewarding the thing you're measuring and therefore paying the commission on it. We've discussed this before.
Yeah.
You know, you want you want customer retention and loyalty, and what you're rewarding your employees on is basically turnover of new clients. What are you going to get? Think about it. That's all you have to just think about it.
It's the telecoms industry that I've been working in for 25 years in a nutshell. Exactly that. The other thing that sprung out when you were talking, and you used the word, it's a constant business, which I thought was really interesting. When you said an airline's like Netflix, I was struggling to see you getting there, but I understood what you meant at the end.
Good, got there.
Do you think it's easier or harder to do culture in inverted commas in a faster business where it's constant like that? Because I think I watched Better Call Saul the other day, and they did one of those time-lapse videos in a airport in part of the scene, and there must have been 1 million people who walked through this airport in about 15 minutes. Do you think it's easier or harder to do culture in a business where there isn't much respite and it is very demanding?
Do you know, you know that when I spoke about the airline and then Netflix, and at the start you struggled to mix the analogies together, try and get this one. So Whitney Houston,
Wow.
when she sings I will always love you, okay? Do you know the difference? You know, like you see X Factor and you see many singers try and sing that song.
Yeah.
Do you know the difference of why Whitney Houston sings it like no other?
Ability?
Yeah. But the song in particular, why is it that when you see Whitney Houston sing it, or when you hear her sing it, you just think, oh, it's just different?
Well, I was going to immediately say because it was written for her, but it wasn't, because it was Dolly Parton first, wasn't it?
I don't know the history of this song. I haven't come equipped with like loads of history. Here's my opinion of it. She's in control of the song.
Yeah.
When it gets to that bit, what's the bit? When it goes, and I.
Yeah, I thought you were going to sing it then.
I'm not going to sing it because I can't do it. When you get to, and you feel it, when you're watching the X Factor, you can feel that they're teetering on the limits of control. When Whitney Houston sings a song, she's on top of it.
Yeah, and it feels like it's guttural for her. Like it feels like it comes from in here. Not.
It's guttural. It's in her comfort zone. She's got it. Everything that she's singing, no matter the note, is beneath her. She's got it. Yeah. And I think of that in a similar way to, and I've given this a lot of thought about Netflix. It just seems like it's such a demanding thing. You know, you think back to I think this is like a big turning point for Netflix. You remember them Making a Murderer documentary?
I do.
What a documentary that was, by the way.
Awesome.
Unbelievable.
I watched it again a couple of weeks ago.
Did you really?
Yeah. I've watched it about 5 times now.
How good is that? That was a real... okay, this is counter to my point because you've watched it again. But you think a masterpiece, an absolutely just phenomenal documentary. You think about Netflix, they made that 3 months later, given that it's a massive hit, they've got to do it. They've got to produce something new again.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's a business where you're always struggling to hit the note. And my feeling, the question that I asked, that I asked myself because I'm boring, is in an organization like that where you're having to stretch constantly to try and find the next big thing, is there something about it that it's not infinite in its nature? Like you have a time and you try and prolong the time that you have your day in the sun. But it just feels like, oh, is there something about it that you just can't be prolific forever? You can't be Usain Bolt winning the world record, winning the Olympic gold for 20 years. I don't know the answer to it. I really don't know the answer to it. Going back to Continental or airlines is, I would say, if you're Whitney Houston and you're in control of it, given the demand and the fast pace, but you're in control of it, you're above it, you're not, your voice isn't rasping, then yes. But there are many businesses, I would say, by their nature, Netflix, I think is Netflix, Amazon, whoever, that it seems to me that is a very difficult thing to expect an organization to do for decades. That's my inkling. Might be wrong. Different back in the day where you have the studios, let's say, and the film, say back in the day, of course they still exist, but with the streaming and the just constantness of you have to produce something else, you can't you don't rerun stuff, you're having to come up with the next Making a Murderer, the next I think it was Netflix, Last Dance, the Michael Jordan. Just you have to be prolific. It just seems like, is that something you can do forever? Again, I don't know the answer, but to conclude my answer to your question is, I think if you can be comfortable and in control, you can sing "I Will Always Love You" and you know you're going to sing "And I" in control. Then yes, if you feel like constantly fighting and struggling to get there, I would say there's a question of whether that's sustainable. Don't know. What do you think?
Well, when you were talking about that, I don't think anyone's completely sustainable, because you mentioned Usain Bolt, but he's no longer the fastest man on the planet. So I think every good thing comes to an end. Could sound like my dad there. No offense, Dad, if you're listening. Yeah, I don't know. I guess everything has its time, doesn't it? Like, when you talk about Netflix, I remember getting the DVDs dropped off of my house and thinking it was the greatest thing that's ever been invented.
So here's my honest answer to that. Yes, everything has its time and everything will die, including all of us, including the planet. Genuine answer. The planet will one day implode, or whatever it does, something like that. Implodes, melts, whatever happens. That will happen at some point. So yes, everything must die. However, for a business, you absolutely do not need to have that perspective, and it is very reasonable to, when you have an infinite cause, something that you're aiming towards but can ultimately never achieve, and you're not loyal to a particular incarnation of your product or service, therefore can engage in some existential flexibility when Netflix, when the technology changes from DVDs, you switch, you do something else. When it changes from streaming to whatever I can't comprehend, if they're a robust enough of an organization and they're loyal to the cause, they'll switch with it and they'll be on top of it, and they'll be the new thing within the new technology. That is a reasonable thing to expect. It's hard because what you're getting into the territory of when things shift from beneath you, you have to cannibalize yourself. We've discussed this many times. It's a difficult thing to do, but is a great predictor of an organization that's going to last over the long term. When planes become electric, hydrogen, whatever, Concorde, we levitate, whatever it might be. If Continental Airlines, whoever it might be, if they have a cause that is infinite and it's about moving people from this place in a comfort, then they can switch with it. If they're loyal to their product or service, they'll last for as long as that product or service lasts. Just the way it works.
So that's about the infinite cause not being, in this case, we'll put people on a plane and get them to the way they want to get to, more being we'll, I don't know, something crazy like we'll get you where you want to get to.
Well, there you go. And I know this sounds abstract, but it's really important. And there's very little utility in just saying this. You have to actually do it, which is a far more difficult thing. But that would be an example of a transformation of something that's a finite cause or a finite goal through to a infinite cause. If you're talking about, if genuinely, forget the wording, it doesn't matter what people say, if the actual business is gearing towards, we want to be move people from A to B via planes, then for as long as planes are in fashion, are the transportation of choice, they'll do well. If you have something higher than that, and you also want to be, as an organization, once you've reached a certain stability in this domain, you want to open yourself up to diversification. Like, how else can we do that? If our cause is we want to move people in a certain way, like with comfort, or make their lives easier, or Airbnbs, make people feel like they're home wherever they are, something like that. Then there are lots of different ways you can do it. Lots of different ways. But as soon as you go, this is my product, and the mission of this business is to sell this product, then you'll do well if you're a good business for as long as that product is relevant.
So how much of that do you work on with clients or potential clients then?
It's the first thing. It's one of the very first things. We discuss this subject of entropy. That's this when we talk about the sun's going to explode and we'll all not be here. That's entropy. It's everything degrades. Entropy always increases. Sandcastles always become a pile of sands. And given that, and the fact that that's true of not only all physical things, but of relationships, of demand, of motivation, of emotion, it's all true. Everything erodes. Then you have to be infinite-minded. In an organization, you have to therefore be infinite-minded. Otherwise, you're going to go like that. You'll have your day and then you'll become a pile of sand. So and then one of the ways that in order to be infinite-minded is just to have an infinite cause, is to have something that, again, genuinely, not just saying it, genuinely, the business is always aiming towards and is open to finding different ways of doing it and will flex if, we've tried this thing, it doesn't work, let's move, let's do something else. But you have to actually build that into the fibers of the company. It's not just putting words on the website or whatever. It's this business needs to work in the way that we're actually gearing towards achieving our unachievable cause.
Have you met prospective clients who can't get their head around the infinite cause and not work with them in the past? Has that been a challenge?
No, but it's always more difficult at the start. So I would never expect a startup organization to have this fully formed. You have to go through a process of trying stuff out, proving viability, figuring out what your basic offering is. You have to go through that phase of establishing yourself as an organization. And because when you're defining an infinite cause, you can't just come up with something. You have to know, you have to have the experience and the feedback of, this is what we're trying to do. So there are some organizations that start cause first. These are often like the passion projects, or someone's been doing something for a long time and they're in an industry and they know that they want to do something slightly differently. So they come into this is the cause and therefore this is the business beneath it. Most businesses don't start like that. You find a little gap in the market. Oh, let's try this. Or I was doing this at another company. Let me try and do this a bit differently. And you go through a process of discovery over however long, a number of years, and then you land on your cause. So sometimes it takes some time, but you always find it. It's always, listen, when you started in telecoms, I think you'd probably be hard pressed to identify like what's your infinite cause. It sounds like a cliche, horrible corporate annoying thing anyway. But after time in the market, and you've have a relationship with your customers, you have. I don't mean this in a like a cheesy hippie way, but you know what means something to you and is important to you, matched up with what matters in the market and what's a good product offering and what your customers care about, then you can define it. It's much easier to define it at that point. So it takes time, but yeah, I've never been in a situation where you can't find it.
So how much time is needed then?
From startup to finding it?
Yeah.
I can't give you an answer. Enough, whatever the time is. What happens, and what has happened with me on a number of times, is I've worked with startups who define something hazy, like this is the sort of thing that I'm aiming towards, and you start that as like a placeholder infinite cause, and you chip away at it, or you edit it and you change it based on those experiences over a couple of years. I can't put a number. I don't. It depends what you're doing.
Yeah, I've spoken to people in the past around like having a bit of a foggy vision as opposed to having a target for something, because you kind of need to spend some time working out some of the stuff you don't want to do and you don't like doing before you decide this is the final destination thing.
I am skeptical of many consultants, and particularly consulting firms. Listen, lots of them do amazing work and it's very important in different areas. I'm skeptical of them. This is what I'm not skeptical of, and I would recommend anybody watching this to do it. Particularly CEO founder levels, it's so hard to do this on your own. You just need someone. It's not complicated work. It really isn't. You just need someone who knows enough, understands these principles well enough to try and draw some of these things out of you. It's just so hard. This is what I do for people. I need it for me.
Yeah.
I need someone to do this for me. You just think that's in my, whatever you want to call it, executive coaching capacity. That's what I think about what I do. Yeah, I have a broad understanding of many different disciplines and I've got good depth of knowledge on certain things. Basically what I'm doing is I'm helping people think, and a bit of accountability. It's really not complicated. And with these kind of questions, you need someone to probe and tease these things out of you. Just sat on the sofa or going for a walk and thinking you're going to come up with it. It's hard. It can happen, but it doesn't. That's not what I find happens most of the time.
Yeah, I think everybody needs a coach.
That is the message to take away from it. But seriously, again, there are, maybe there are people watching this from all different parts of the world. I would say, let's give this piece of advice. If you're a CEO and you're at any stage, you're starting an organization, you've got a good organization that you want to make better, which everybody should feel that way. Just try it. You've got to find the right person. It's like a therapist. You've got to find the right one. But if you get someone that's sharp, and it doesn't even mean that they have to be better at your job than you. You don't have to have that. You can have some. It's funny. It's just a different perspective. When you get a good coach, all they're there to do is just help you. They're just trying to get what's out of your brain. It's not them putting things in your brain. That's a mentor. That's someone in your own industry that can give you advice. Coaches can, of course, give a bit of advice, but it's just that it's having enough knowledge to know what they need to extract out of themselves and being able to facilitate that. That's all it is. So I would genuinely, that is one of the things I would really recommend exploring as a CEO. Get a coach and just see if it helps you. Try it. Do a few sessions, see if it helps. One more thing on this book that I wanted to mention before we wrap up. We've spoken about this principle of what I call a bell. Let's for now, because I haven't got time to explain it. Think of it as a mechanism. So you have a philosophy and principles, then you have these things in the middle that make that philosophy actually happen and therefore impact the behavior. There's a really good example of this one. So Continental Airlines, predictable and reliable. They had a problem, which was flights coming out of Newark regularly delayed to complex airspace around the area. So there's something that was out of their control when trying to achieve this philosophy or these principles of being reliable and predictable. So here's what they did. In order to achieve reliability and not having knock-on impact on the other flights using the same plane, therefore making them delayed, not reliable, not predictable, they decided that Newark flights would go directly back to hubs rather than into other domestic airlines into Newark, so there's going to be no knock-on impact. That's an example of the difference between espousing a principle that you say you care about and really caring about it and figuring. That's a complex thing to do, has financial implications, but over time, what you give is you give customers the confidence in this principle you want them to feel confident in, which this is a predictable and reliable airline. Just a nice little, something that's hard to do is complicated, but they've executed it because they really care about the principle.
Because I can imagine that was a tough conversation to have around the boardroom. Like, especially if the CFO or the finance guys were in there and talking about use of fuel, the cost, the turnaround on that. And that's really interesting that with the cause, they've gone, oh no, like I want the team to be working on our cause, but like we need to do something about it as well as an organization.
You think there's a very easy and very strong argument to make back to that? Well, let's go back to the hubs and not through Newark, and you go, well, every other airline does it. Your customers know it's not our fault. everyone knows that Newark is a bad air. It's a very, very convincing argument against that change. But what it did, again, it gave customers the confidence. They know if they fly with this airline, it's going to be predictable, it's going to be reliable. All of these things, you can make the financial argument. You can, I know a lot of the time I talk in principles and in philosophy. It's because it then translates to the bottom line. It translates to, if you're picking your airline, you know who to go with. Imagine in this country, let's take rail. Someone sort that out for God's sake.
Take rail and throw it in the bin.
If you knew, as Avanti, and let's say there were a new one that came in, a Japanese company that came in, they're bang on time. Who are you booking with? Wherever you are, you're in, or you're in another country, and the same airline, it's the same train line there. I'm going to book with them. They're predictable and they're reliable. These things translate to money.
I can imagine. If only someone could build a train that wasn't affected by snow
or rain or sunshine, please.
In the UK as well, though, that's the thing. It always gets me.
So there we go. From worst to first, Gordon Bethune.
I like it. I'm going to give that a read.
Yeah.